What is up, guys? You got NotTheWorst here, bringing another Black Desert online video, and today we're taking a look at the endgame PvE guide for Woosa Awakening. This class just dropped yesterday onto the live servers, and I honestly wanted to wait about a week or so. I had planned on putting out this guide following Monday after it, so I'd had an ample amount of time to actually get on it. I've been grinding with her for a lot of hours since then. Had some on stream, and then been doing quite a bit of fine tuning since then. And the reason I wanted to go ahead and put one out now, one, to kind of give you an early-ish guide to kind of start with, and two, I'm seeing a lot of misinformation about her being a poor grinder in general, or her being especially bad at Hex and things like that, and that's simply not true. So far, I have managed to do between 19,000 to 22,000 trash loot at Hex, which is very good and top tier with it. It's just that this class plays quite a bit differently than what we've seen on other classes, and there are some specifics with it that are very important. And also, you don't just stand there and face tank mobs. This isn't a striker, so plays a little differently. I wanted to go ahead and put out an early guide to at least give some people some ideas and maybe fine-tune things over time, or the community can kind of dive into what we start with here and then move forward, rather than just writing her off as trash day one when she's really not being given a fair chance. So that being said, this is an early guide. I fully expect to kind of tweak this over the next couple of weeks and put up an updated one once I've kind of perfected things, but this is at least a really good starting point on all cases, especially because she has a few interesting scenarios with how she plays. So covering that, especially the skill add-ons on, I imagine I'm going to change quite a bit, so keep that in mind while you look at that. But first, I want to talk about Lightstones, because it's actually really important on her what sets we're running here, more so than a lot of others. She has some interesting options, so let's jump over and take a look at that. All right, so first and foremost, she does indeed become a class with Lightstone sets that likes Death Blow. This does impact your pet damage effects significantly. All of her skills don't necessarily have 100% crit rate, even when properly set up without it. Most of them do. Most of the heavy hitters do, though, but things like your RMB chain suffer from that. So this is definitely a solid option. I'm not going to tell you it's best in slot option, however, which is a little bit different than most of the classes and most PvE guides for it. You can also run Vicious Shadows as per standard. This is just a good all-around set for virtually any class at virtually any spot. When we're talking about like Gyphon, especially because you're virtually 100% back attacking, this becomes especially good. Trolls, it's pretty nice. Hex, it's not as heavy because your back attacks are a little bit minimal. Obviously, critical hit damage is still really nice. This set or Deathblow is all very, very solid and sort of best in slot for it. However, this class has actually very fast clear speed, very large AoEs, which means the monsters are disappearing very quickly, and a very large number of them happen very quickly because of how her damage gets kind of front-loaded and explodes later on in the rotation. That's what she said. So, that being the case, the true best in slot, believe it or not, is the set called Fast and Rageous, which you might not be super familiar with compared to these other sets. Okay, this set increases your Black Spirit Rage recovery 1% every 10 seconds. So it's 0.1 every second with it, and it goes up. To do that, you need Disrupt, Mind, Mountain, and an Iridescent Lightstone. Not super expensive for any of these, especially compared to double blades out of Death Blow, or needing that Strike Stone RNG lottery winner to get one off the marketplace for your Vicious Shadows. And then I'm also, just to pair with this, I am using an artifact set to increase Black Spirit Rage, the maximum amount 10% with each of the artifacts, so an extra 20. And then personally, I happen to have a Pentungrad ring and a Pentungrad neck, boosting that up. So I have 150% Black Spirit Rage, not necessary for this. Now, I know what you're thinking. NotTheWorst. You're giving up AP, critical hit damage, and a bunch of other things that you could be running with this just to get Black Spirit Rage boosted. Does that make sense? Yes, because this class absolutely decimates every single mob anywhere near her right in the middle of her rotation. When you have your Shift E, we're going to get into this in the skill rotation, but your Shift E, your Shift RMB, when these skills start exploding and you line them up with your Shift LMB, everything anywhere near you just deletes all at the same time. This means that even with like halfway decent clear speed, your Z buff is up 100% of the time. Okay, so you're going to have attack speed constantly through the roof with this set, and you're also going to get the 30 AP buff. Now, her SLMB skill, and again, we'll talk about skill rotation, does have a 20 AP, but keep in mind the Z buff does overwrite self buffs for that, so you're going to have the 30 AP benefit and exclude that 20 AP off of the SLMB skill with that Z buff up. But the attack speed being as high as it is, constantly, 100% uptype on that absolutely changes the entire demeanor of this class, how quickly you're clearing mobs. It's it's like playing an entirely different class this way. And quite honestly, if you try this set out and the spot you're grinding, you're able to clear efficiently so that you're constantly maintaining over 100%. You're gonna actually have a difficult time going back to a different set and running it. Now, I'm not saying she doesn't run well with Deathblow, because she does, and I've actually still done it in 19k plus trash and hex with Deathblow, so it's definitely still doable in that scenario. But the reason for that is because even on a set like Deathblow, you still get near 100% uptime with Z-Buff. It's pretty close. Obviously, you end up with gaps. If you do fall behind, because one thing is running that set, it's sweaty in the sense of like you're not gonna be sitting there casually like, you know, taking a drink, whatever, or you're streaming and you're like talking to your chat and that kind of thing constantly, because every time you stand AFK, your Z-Buff's getting burned up and you're not going to be restoring it. So you may run into some spaces with gaps when you're not being super efficient. In those scenarios, obviously you just want to use your E-Buff to kind of cover that space. You get an extra 30 seconds there to kind of help you out. Her E-Buff does not have attack speed on it, so keep that in mind, but it'll help boost especially the crit rate and things like that in between, that when you don't have that Z-Buff. Once you get your Z-Buff up once, you're just going to destroy absolutely everything around you. Other options, if you don't want to go with that, although I strongly push you to doing that, you can run like the Wild at either Trolls or Gyfin, Demi-Human, or Kama Sylvia damage respectively. Those are both really strong sets at either one if you don't want to go with one of these more expensive ones, although again, just do the Black Spirit Rage, trust me, bro. Then there's all sorts of other ones, Train Fist and things like that you can run too, but in this scenario it's not super expensive to get the Black Spirit Rage, and it just completely unlocks the class. So with that said, with the Lightstones, let's go ahead and talk about our crystal setups. There's a couple of fine-tuning things that we want to look at there too. All right, so for crystal setups, I've got two setups that we're going to take a look at. And the first one we're going to call, don't worry about the title and the screenshot of them, is we're going to call the first one our safe option. And this is while you're kind of learning to get good at Awakening Woosa and really balancing that Z buff constantly. And then we have the optimal set that we're going to run, which is going to be, you know, kind of case dependent on your actual gear and AP, because AP caps for the spot that you're grinding actually matter. So first, let's talk about the safe option. Nothing super amazing here. We have Gen Vipers. Note the lack of Elcars we've dropped in favor of some Hooms on here, and then we have another 2 Hooms to get the full 4 effect set. The additional HP, damage reduction, a little bit of accuracy, obviously not as much as Elcars would provide, is pretty nice. This might not be entirely viable if your gear is a bit lower, especially on the accuracy side. Unfortunately, this class does suffer from not having an accuracy self buff or a evasion shred skill on it, so your hit rate at specifically Trolls or Hex might be a little bit off if that's the scenario. So make sure you're paying attention to that, especially her shift RMB, the trap chain where you just hold RMB afterwards. Those all have really terrible accuracy modifiers, none in some case. So that can be a little bit of a hindrance there. So pay attention to that. This is more so a set for kind of learning. It gives you a little bit of safety as you're getting comfortable with her, because she does have one string of unprotected skills that you are absolutely going to use, and it's very simple to use, as you'll see in the skill demo once you kind of get used to it. But this is kind of a safe option to give you that space while you're kind of learning it. Once you've kind of maximized it, we're going to go over to her, I guess, maximum damage output here. So in this set, we see I have 2 Okrads and 2 Alucas crystals. That's because we want that attack speed. We're using anything and everything to increase our attack speed and make this class absolutely broken. I have 1 crystal of Elcar in this set, and then 1 power crystal. This can easily be swapped for a crystal of Elcar if you need to. In this scenario, I just don't want to run house buff every single time and still hit cap at Trolls. This hits cap and then some at Hex easily in this setup, especially when you factor the 30 AP off the Z buff. That's constantly up. But yeah, I have that one just in there because I'm lazy and I'm not going to swap it out every time I go between one spot or the other. You could definitely swap in another Elcar there just to ensure that you're getting 100% hit rate. And if you have it without it, you do have other options that you could stick in there. If you find that you want stamina or something, maybe a couple Macalods, just 2 of them in those place, whatever, you could kind of flex that. But I would say that it's pretty important to actually run your attack speed, Alucas, and Okrad crystals in this build, and then just make sure you're filling in the gaps to hit your AP caps however you need outside of that. So not too much to talk about there. We just want attack speed and make sure we're hitting our accuracy caps, hit rate caps rather, and our AP caps for the spot that we're grinding. Obviously, if you're at Gyfin, stacking more AP can be more beneficial since you only have a 70% restrictive AP cap there versus the Elvia zones, Trolls and Hex, which you have the 5% zone, so stacking more AP is pretty useless at those spots. So with that piece covered, let's talk about the skill add-ons and how they're going to tie in with our skill rotation. Okay, here's our skill add-ons listed, and this more so than anything in this guide, as I said, this is an early guide. We're obviously going to be tweaking things as the class is out a bit longer and I get even more playtime on this. This one's the most rough draft out of anything in this guide for sure. I think the skill rotation is pretty on point and maybe only change a little bit. I know for a fact the Lightstones are optimal and the crystals are good, at least for my gear for that setup, but this is probably going to get changed more so than anything else. And something to point out specifically that's not in here is Stormfall, which is out of her pre-awakening kit. That's actually a tier 3 add-on, and I do use it from time to time in some scenarios, which I'll talk about in the skill rotation. So there's definitely room to maybe squeeze that in on here. Ultimately, what we were going for is making sure we have our hit rate at maximum. We want our AP cap at maximum, and we want to have our critical hit maxed out whenever we can, or at least wherever it makes sense. So that's what we were kind of focusing on, and the only thing we really keyed in extra damage on this was the Blooming Death skill. What's unique about this skill is it always back attacks. When you're facing the mobs, it actually hits them from behind. That's what she said. So that you're getting pings on back attacks the whole time. So obviously it makes sense to add back attack damage to that. And we have critical hit damage on there as well. This can definitely be mixed and matched. I just always caution when you're adjusting skill add-ons. If you're following the skill rotation we're going to cover, you want to make sure your skill add-ons coincide with that so that you're not overlapping different skills. A lot of times, you'll just kind of copy and paste these skill add-ons, but you're using your own skill rotation. That might not make sense, and vice versa. Maybe you copy a skill rotation but different skill add-ons. Make sure you're paying attention to what you're using when so that they don't overlap. A few key points in this. Note that we have the Shifties, her only tier 3 out of her Awakening. That's Mark of the Moon for the console players. That's her only Awakening tier 3 add-on that is out. So we want that critical hit 30% on it just to cover all of our bases, since we are not running Death Blow and we're running that Black Spirit Rage additional attack there, and then a 10% attack speed on this one as well. This is actually our setup skill, as you'll see in the rotation. So putting these right on the lead makes a lot of sense, and it's also going to help us burn through the unprotected skills that you use shortly after this without too much risk on it. Other than that, there's nothing like really outstanding here. We just make sure that we've got DPD buffs throughout the whole skill rotation, attack speed throughout the whole skill rotation, accuracy throughout the whole skill rotation, or at least just the pieces where we need it, because there's actually one section that we need it. And then we have AP cap at all times, thanks to the 20 monster damage. You could potentially drop maybe the attack speed and just stick with a 7% on one of the tier 2s and pick up the monster damage plus 30 if you need it to help you hit cap, or maybe you're lazy with your buffs, so you don't want to get church buff or something. Whatever the case may be, obviously you can change that, and I fully expect these to be mixed and matched over time while we kind of get more used to this class. So there is the skill add-ons. Now let's take a look at the rotation and see how everything's going to tie in. All right, so let's get into the skill rotation. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on screen first for you if you are on console or prefer the skill names. Those are on the left with the skill icons as well. If you want the key inputs, they are on the right, as a lot of PC players prefer to just get them as key inputs. I'm going to try and talk about these mostly as skill names, at least verbally, so you may need to line those up just so that everybody wins that way, using the skill name, and then you have the inputs if you need them. So first skill in this, we're going to talk about each skill, how it kind of works, and then chain together and kind of explain. First one's Mark of the Moon. Has a bit of a longer animation. It's got great HP regen, really great HP regen. And this also has our tier 3 add-on. So this kind of sets us up to kind of get us going through everything else. This is really what I'd call a setup skill. You're going to be paying attention to how your mobs are positioning for like hex, trolls, that sort of thing during that skill, because you can cancel out of it, and we want to make sure we're canceling out if needed once the mobs are positioned where we want to jump into the next skill, Life Lore, and its chain along with it. The Life Lore chain has 4 skills total that we're going to use, and they're unprotected, so positioning with this, especially like Hex, is going to be really important. At Gyphon, not as important. You can sit through the Shifty animation the entire time because you're just waiting on the wake up animation of the mobs. They have that massive DP buff to start with, so you can't do a whole lot there anyways. It's not going to matter too much. But yeah, anyways, you do want to pay attention to where the elites are at, especially at Hex, and then trolls as well, so that you can pivot out of it whenever you need to, whenever it's going to make sense, so that you get into your Life Lord chain right away. So you're just going to go ahead and put that input, and it'll automatically flow all the way through Soul Cleanse. So it's going to go Life Lore to set that trap. You've got the Mark of the Moon on a couple of mobs. Obviously, we don't have mobs here, so you won't see that. We have the Mark of the Moon explosion that's going to go off along with that Life Lore as well, and then it'll automatically chain into Session Field which is the flow. Bloom Deluge, which it essentially flows. It's a separate skill, but it automatically uses it if you hold the same key down. It's going to give you a crit buff as well, which is really nice. And then it'll finish off with Soul Cleanse, which has some MP sustain, which may be nice if you're not running infinite potions. Not super necessary on that skill, but it chains with it, so why not just go ahead and use it. The crit buff is super nice. It's just that it only lasts for 5 seconds, so won't be out throughout the entire rotation, which is slightly disappointing, but understandable. And this chain, again, is unprotected, so that's why we want to pivot out of our Mark of the Moon and make sure we are not getting hit in the face from mobs. It's the only piece of it's that is not going to be protected, and it's also the most important, so that we're setting up that trap to make sure everything lines up in order. To note, this is also the lowest accuracy chain in this skill, or rather the only pieces you might struggle with accuracy, so make sure you're paying attention between your crystal builds, what kind of sets that you're using to hit as much accuracy as possible, since we don't have the benefit of an accuracy buff or evasion shred skill in her, just the add-ons alone. Next up is Nether Blast, which is an AP buff skill that's on it. This is not going to be as important if you are following what I recommended in the Lightstone section, so that we have 100% uptime on our Z buff, because the Z buff 30 AP supersedes the 20 AP buff off of this skill, so you can't have both with it. So if you're just jumping to the skill rotation and checking that out, and you jumped here in the video, I highly recommend at least going back to the Lightstone section of the video. There's a timestamp for it listed, so you can just jump over there, check that out, because this Lightstone setup for her running the maximum Black Spirit Rage is actually really important to making her absolutely broken. So I highly recommend doing that. Not required, but it really, really changes the play of the class. All right, after the Nether Blast, we go into Sahi's Descent. This is a very strong skill. Has a little bit of cast time on it. This is where you're going to see your Life Lure go off, and Mark of the Moon trap sets will have also just recently triggered. It goes off 5 seconds after the original mark gets placed onto the mob. So all of these line up roughly right around each other, especially when you have the Z buff up. It flies through these. So you'll notice when you use that Sahi's Descent, not only is the damage good, but that's kind of where everything just disappears. All the mobs are dead or virtually dead, or anything that was grouped properly from there. It just destroys everything since everything's going off. Then we have Soul Shower, which is a nice super armor skill. Just to get a little bit of extra damage. It has an E flow in there that you can hold. You can actually put that on most of these skills, and it won't make much of a difference. And then from there, we finish off with Blooming Death. This skill always back attacks, so make sure you're paying attention to that with where your positioning is. You don't want to reposition to behind the mobs, then use it, because you're actually making yourself get frontal attacks. So pay attention to that. It's really, really strong. We put crit and back attack skill add-on modifiers on this. That skill just hits very hard. Really nice cleanup skill after we've used all our bomb skills to kind of blow things up, and it also has really good HP regen. Just for even more sustain. You'll notice with all these forward guards in your damage, you're not taking a ton of damage, but when you do maybe misstep or something like that, this can be a good cover. Now you'll see this last skill, we have Stormfall listed as an alternate, and this is why I mentioned in the add-on section we may want to find some room for Stormfall. This isn't going to be used every single time in your rotation. This is a little more heads-up play based on what you're doing. The difference is when you use Mark of the Moon, if you're using the entirety of the animation because you're waiting on mob positioning, you won't need Stormfall for any reason, because your Mark of the Moon will be back up. This rotation goes from top to bottom and repeats absolutely no problem. But in scenarios where you use a very short Mark of the Moon and early cancel it so that you can get positioned properly for your Life Lure, maybe the mobs aggroed, like more so the elites, but maybe they aggroed right away and they're directly facing you almost immediately. Well, you're going to cancel out of Mark of the Moon much earlier and jump into Life Lure right away. You're still going to get all of your explosions happening at the same time, but at the end, you may have a few seconds before Mark of the Moon is up. Stormfall is a great skill to just go ahead and throw in there. You can use it out of your Awakening kit, despite it being a pre-awakened. It'll swap you over and use it however long you need to. The damage is still good, and then you can just press A or D and then RMB to swap over. That it will use Soul Cleanse for you and swap you back into your Awakening, so you're good to jump right back into Mark of the Moon and rinse and repeat. So that'll be kind of heads up. I'll go through the rotation now using a full Mark of the Moon animation so that you'll see it goes plenty. All right, and then we're going to go into our unprotected traps here. And then get our big skill. And here's where everything just blows up and dies. And then we're just kind of cleaning up into that Soul Cleanse. And we can see Mark of the Moon's already open. I'm going to go ahead and E-flow because we have it up on that Blooming Death. Okay, so now I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to cancel Mark of the Moon almost immediately. So you're going to see that the skill won't be off cooldown just yet. And that's where we're going to go ahead and put in Stormfall to make up that gap. So here, the mobs are grouped where I want them, so I just cancel right away. And we're going to go through our normal skills, throw that in. Here we go. And then we just have Blooming Death going. And I'm going to throw Stormfall right on the end, and then we can just jump right back into Mark of the Moon. So that's the full rotation where you have an early cancel on it. So pay attention to that, which one you're doing. If you need to throw Stormfall in there, go for it. I'll do it one more time. And there you have it. So now I'm going to do it with the Z buff, and that's where you're really going to see that Mark of the Moon cooldown. And you're also going to note where these explosions are happening when you get to your Sahi's Descent, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about, where everything blows up. Obviously, in the skill demo, you'll get that much more clearly because you'll actually see the mobs dying when we're actually on mobs as well. But just to give you an idea of what we're looking like and why it's really important to run this Lightstone set and maximize that Z buff, you want this 100% uptime, which is easily achievable. So let's go ahead and run that set. So I'll do a full animation, and we'll have this off cooldown, no problem still. So here again, we see how everything's kind of exploding one after the other there. That you're going to see when we're on the mobs, or when you're actually trying this out and you're on mobs, that is massive, massive, massive damage, and your clear speed is actually very strong at that point. Here I went ahead and canceled Mark of the Moon, so we can put a Stormfall in there just if we need to. Throw the E, quick Stormfall for a couple seconds, and then swap right back, and we're back in it. So there you go. That's the full combo. Completely rotates itself. Like I said, a little bit of heads up play is going to be necessary with it. So, you know, don't just 1, 2, 3, 4 and kind of zone out with what you're doing. You want to be paying attention at least somewhat what's going on, so that, you know, it makes sense and you're not just getting dead. It is very protected. The sustain is really strong with it. You just need to play it right. The damage is, you know, getting front loaded and then being dealt later on in the rotation. It's not something we're super used to with most classes, so it takes a little getting used to. But once you do, as you'll see in the skill demo, she's very, very, very strong. So if you run that Black Spirit Rage Lightstone, depending on your gear and other things, and obviously getting used to playing this class, like I mentioned before, I've done 19 to 22k trash loot at Hex with it. And even if you're not running that Lightstone set, I have still cracked 19k trash loot with just running Deathblow at Hex. So that's those. If you're not familiar with Hex specifically, those are pretty solid numbers, really solid numbers actually. Succession Woosa does roughly around that ballpark for me, just the same. So even running without the BSR set, getting that Deathblow set is still fine, because your Z buff's going to be up a lot, and we're going to fly through those attack speed animations a lot quicker than we would without it. So with that said, we'll just finish off with a skill demo. That's going to be it for this video. If you did enjoy it, be sure to like it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. If you want to catch me playing live, there's a link to my Twitch page in the description down below. You can jump on over there, drop a follow so you get notifications for that as well. With that said, that's going to be it for this one. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.